Hi there. Thank you so much for joining for this session. Mind the Gap, the agile and accessible research and development behind Able to Play. My name is Armand Nobari. I'm the founder and CEO of a game studio called Good Trouble, and we're building an accessible games discovery platform called Able to Play. My goal is that when this session concludes, you feel better equipped to jump right into the unknown, ask big, audacious questions, talk with players, talk with users, and ultimately build more accessible games, websites, apps, and products. So without further ado, let's get started. Here's our agenda for this session. First, I'll cover a quick background on myself, why you should believe even a single sliver of a word that I tell you. We'll then dive into a primer on agile research and development pipelines, unpacking what the heck that even means, where this line of thinking comes from, how it relates to games. How R&D happens is such a huge topic. So just to give you a heads up, I'm going to focus on small team R&D because I find it to be the most empowering for individuals to affect change on a team and project level. Really ground level steps to execute an R&D plan. Later in the FAQ section, I'll even have some tips in case you are powerless to change how a team is working, how to still use this process and pipeline tips to kind of advocate for change instead. With that in mind, I'll walk you through a retrospective of some specific steps we took while creating, running, and scaling our R&D pipeline that had the biggest impact while we researched and developed Able to Play. At the end, I'll cover some frequently asked questions that I've seen come up through my career, and I'll let you know how to get in touch with me in case you have questions or need help on a related topic. So who am I, and why should you trust a single word that I have to say? My name is Armand Nobari. I've had a 15-year career focused on building accessible products at places like YouTube, where I was on the community UX team. I've worked with some absolutely incredible user researchers. I've integrated data and research practices at every step of my career, and I've seen how data and really crispy R&D practices can bring order and nuance to otherwise really messy and stressful projects. And that's part of why I'm so excited to kind of share all of this in a talk with you today. I'm also the founder of an accessibility-focused game studio called Good Trouble. Prior to founding Good Trouble, I co-ran a product design agency also focused on accessibility. Because so much of my career was focused outside of the games industry, I try to bring a fresh perspective to solving challenging problems in games, especially with regards to accessibility. And finally, I'm a cancer survivor that lives with a disability. I fought cancer earlier in life, I kicked its butt, and surviving that experience really put a fire in me. To kind of turn the pages back, me and my friends in the hospital really loved playing games together, but they couldn't always play games in the same way that I could just jump in due to various accessibility concerns or disability considerations. I found myself often kind of being the controller for my friends. They would tell me where to go or what to do, and I would just make that happen. Or for games I was really familiar with, I would first pop open the settings and change key bindings or hotkeys, adjust and fine-tune things to make it easier for them to play. My treatment for cancer was really aggressive, and while it left me living with multiple disabilities, honestly, I'm a really cheerful person. I can't really complain. I absolutely love life, and I love moments like this where I get to share really cool stuff with some awesome people. So thank you again for being here. Today's session is a small look behind the curtain of Able to Play, a games discovery platform that makes it easier than ever to know how accessible games are to you. I'm not going to disclose our 11 herbs and spices, but rather I'm going to share some fundamental techniques that any team on any kind of project, game or website or app or what have you, can integrate and adopt to build an R&D pipeline that can turn big, audacious questions into tangible products or end results in a structured and repeatable fashion. So let's dive right in to a primer on agile R&D pipelines. No prior experience needed. Let's really get started. What the heck do I even mean by agile R&D pipelines? What does that mean? So first up, agile. This is an iterative approach to project management and product development that emphasizes rapid adaptation, continuous delivery, and close collaboration and feedback loops with users. Some might suggest that Agile means exactly one specific thing, but really it's more of a collection of methodologies and principles to building in this sort of adaptive, flexible, feedback-driven way. In an R&D context, this means we're regularly running and fine-tuning research based on emerging data and user feedback, rather than following a rigid, predetermined plan. So we've got a North Star for where we're going, we know what we're building, we know who we're building it for, but we're also still asking questions along the way, checking for biases, and building iteratively. R&D means research and development. It's a systematic and integrated approach to investigating problems, uncovering data, and experimenting to gain new knowledge and create novel solutions to problems. A key part of the R&D process is reflecting on the results of an experiment and then measuring, are we getting closer or further from our success criteria? It's really, a tool set of objective, neutral kind of questions to just ask and measure. Are we getting closer? Is it hot or cold? Are we asking the right questions to even determine what our success criteria should be? So R&D basically means, we're going to figure this out and build it while still learning about the thing we're building. And by pipeline, I mean, we're talking about an interconnected process where the output of one stage becomes input for the next. So in other words, earlier parts of the process inform the later parts of the process. Altogether now, as a way to approach things, it means you're centering your research efforts on actual users, not hypothetical ideas, not purely academic statistics, but real users with real lived experience. And you're building iterations of the thing you're making, starting small at first, testing to see how it feels or lands with users, testing to see how effective initial and incremental decisions are, making refinements, and then building out the other parts in a similar way. And when you anchor these efforts on a clear North Star and have a compelling vision to work with, this style of R&D can be really adaptive and flexible. It means that the bigger, more critical pieces get built out incrementally, and it means that along the way you're clarifying the vision you're building towards as you learn new things. For accessibility, this is huge. There's no monolithic model of accessibility. There's no single magic box to tick. So when you're building in this iterative, incremental way, you ensure that new data, new perspectives, and new information about how the people with various disabilities interact with the thing that you're building are heard, understood, and integrated, not just into the plan, but also into the team's understanding of the problem space. It can kind of help develop team-wide curiosity and team-wide empathy for anticipating and understanding the different perspectives and viewpoints of people with disabilities maybe we've never personally considered, despite being the people trying to build and solve for those needs. So to close out the primer section for anyone who's unfamiliar with this style of working, this is what it looks like as a continuous process. You establish your next starting point. This is either a first step or a next step. This could mean deciding we're going to build something, deciding we're going to learn something, but you basically just set an initial small, the best next smallest step. You determine the most relevant gap in your knowledge, and you both talk to people about it and analyze existing artifacts that you find online or in the world or that you have access to. You use what you learn there to build the next iteration or prototype of what you're ultimately building. You keep the scope of what you build in this small step just enough to apply what you've learned, And you can apply this to creating levels, game mechanics, sign up flows, basically anything. Then you test what you built and measure if it's closer or further from your end goal, your success criteria. The core idea here is you're not building in a silo. You're getting feedback and hearing what people think as your concepts become reality. From there, you'll have everything you need to take the next step. Either we got to roll it back, we weren't asking the right question, we got further away from success, or maybe it's more neutral and we should, refine a little bit more and try again, or, you get a big green light, go decision, we're on the right track. You continue this process for the entire development of the project. If it seems like a lot or like it's very science-based, it is. Building companies and games and websites and apps, building anything is freaking hard. Working as a team can be hard. Getting deep into project timelines and realizing you built the wrong thing is a nightmare. Sometimes nothing makes sense. We managed to electrify rocks, and now we can control lights on a screen to tell a story. That's so freeform and magical, and it's easy to forget that when an entire team of people try to solve a freeform problem, especially when making art, it just gets messy. That's why I rely on these more R&D and product grounded principles and workflows to make sense of it all. And that's why this style of working is so effective. It's a repeatable process. Every step is relatively bite-sized, and ultimately, you're building something for other people to use. So it cuts right to the chase and gets to the user feedback really quickly. If users feel like something isn't working right, if players feel like the level is not working right or the mechanics are floaty or what have you, it's so much better to hear that early, take it on the chin, and know that there's still more work to do. And then you adapt. On the other hand, if you put something in front of users or players and they absolutely love what you've built, why not hear that sooner? Especially as it comes to the topic of accessibility. If you are trying to be very, adaptive, very accessible, preempting people's needs and really trying to empathize and understand what someone's lived experience, their challenges playing a certain genre, you work really hard at it, you put it in front of them, and they either say, nice try, but you're misunderstanding the problem, that's so good to use as part of this process. Similarly, if you go through all that trouble and they absolutely love what you've built, what a validation for those efforts. It's always good to, get out of the silo. It's going to be scary the first few times if you're not used to it. Trust me, I promise you, the users you are ultimately trying to serve do not have it out for you, at least in a structured research context. Who can say what lurks behind the horrors of social media? So with the primer wrapped up, let's dive into Able to Play. Again, no 11 herbs and spices here. It's fairly high level, but very focused on the impactful steps of our R&D pipeline. So back when I was in the hospital going through chemo, I would help my hospital friends play games. Sometimes I would provide the inputs to achieve what they wanted to see happen on the screen. Other times I would, use my library of Steam games to just try and anticipate their needs. I had a friend with a limb difference, so I picked games with, pretty forgiving mobility controls. One of my closest friends, just after chemotherapy, had photosensitive epilepsy. So I knew, okay, I gotta help them find a game that doesn't have any sudden flashings or really aggressive patterns or glitch effects and things like that. Other times I would just help friends configure their games so that they would have an easier time jumping in without needing to worry about the settings and whatnot. This experience really stuck with me. And when I founded Good Trouble, it really led me right from the jump to ask one specific question. How do you know if you can play a game? And as it turns out, it's really complicated. Abilities and disabilities are complex and nuanced and deeply personal topics. You might have a limb difference, you might be blind or partially sighted, You might be a busy parent needing to hold a baby while you are gaming with your one free hand. Accessibility needs are a spectrum, and they go beyond specific disability associations. Everybody can benefit from asking themselves, what are my accessibility needs? Ultimately, I believe it just comes down to the build quality of a game or a product. A game's price, if it requires an internet connection, if the UI has too much animation, all of these things might make a game or a product a complete non-starter for somebody. It's not just one, it's not just a dozen, it's not even just 24 boxes to tick. So we set out to really not just solve this problem, but deeply understand this problem and really check our biases at the door. So first, we decided the best way to start this out was we just want to go and talk with gamers with disabilities. And sure, I have my own lived experience. Plenty of folks that I grew up with, friends and family members, play games and have disabilities, sure. But I wanted to really check my biases. And with a problem space and topic as big as this question demands, how do you know if you can potentially play any game? We knew we needed to ask a lot of gamers in a lot of places with access to a lot of different devices and budgets and lived experiences about what their accessibility related challenges are, what their pain points are, what their experiences are, what their hopes and dreams are, really. The only problem was, at this point, it was me and my co-founder just trying to figure this out in the margins of our other studio work, which was already like 6 days a week full-time commitment. So we were kind of in this corner of pain, starting this out. Extremely small team, extremely limited resources, extremely limited time, and we are mere mortals. So to reference this diagram from before, we knew that we needed to talk with gamers with disabilities about their experience, and now we had to figure out a way to do that, to research the most relevant gap in our knowledge of understanding this problem space, and specifically to do that at a meaningful scale to a meaningful depth. So even this alone, first step, it felt like such an audacious task. So we broke it down into some key considerations. We need to have something that can rapidly scale. We need something where we can identify gaps in our data, ideally very easy. We need something that doesn't take a lot of time to run. We were already, working mad hours, 6 days a week on other stuff. We knew we had to take this on. And sometimes the reality is that, there's no one else to do the job. So we needed something that could kind of maybe run on autopilot, we hoped. And to make it even more difficult, free would be really nice. Free would be a big benefit. If we had to catch one win, free would be good. And there's nothing like that out of the box. It's like, asking for the most amazing magic trick to just pop into existence in front of you. It's just not going to happen. So we had to design our process from scratch. And we decided the best way to run this research was to use surveys, since they're relatively straightforward to make. There's free tools out there, and once sent out, they can be completed asynchronously. If you've talked with or worked as, someone in the user research field, surveys are a really reliable way to get scale, qualitative and quantitative data. They're really flexible, and people are used to filling out surveys. So we put all the eggs in the one basket. It could have blown up in our face. Thankfully, it didn't. I'm happy to share the results. We made an initial survey. We kept it fairly high level, and we indicated that since it was a very brief survey, only a few total questions, we might select some participants for future paid research. No upfront incentive means that this survey would be very simple to make and run, and from there, we'll handle one-on-one paid testing with a different process later in the pipeline. Our focus at this point was just getting an absolute ton of baseline foundational information from our target users in as many places and through as many conditions, through as many lived experiences as possible. To scale our research to the degree that we wanted, while still operating within the bounds of reality and our constraints, and those 4 goals we were trying to hit, we decided to use an approach called the snowball method. It's sometimes also called referral sampling, but snowballs are way more fun and way more visual. At the end of our survey, we had one last question. Would you please send this survey to anyone you think should have their voice heard as part of this project? It's a very earnest question. No growth hacking, no guilt tripping, just earnestly asking, would you please send this to anyone that you think should have their voice heard as part of this project? And earlier in the survey, we explained a bit about what the project was, so they could at least feel that there was a tangible outcome as a result of this survey, and it wasn't just them, depositing insights about their life into some mysterious black box. By starting with a small group of participants who then refer other potential participants, we gradually increase our sample size like a snowball growing as it rolls downhill. So it can lead to pretty exponential sample size growth without a lot of micromanaging. But before I say even a single word more about the snowball method, there's one big point of caution that needs to be accounted for. Any good researcher prior to this slide was probably shaking their head saying, you got to mention that this style of participant recruiting has an inherent sampling bias. And as similar participants tend to be gathered from within the same network, you have to account for that. So we did. To counteract the sampling bias, you need to ensure that your survey has some sort of demographic question. That way you can monitor if respondents are heavily over-indexing one way or another. In our case, we asked a high-level categorical question. Do you identify as having a disability in any of the following categories? And then a list of various categories. This is one of the total of 4 or 5 questions in this initial survey. And even when people who did not identify as having a disability completed the survey, those insights were useful too. Because we had that demographic question, we could see where our snowball was getting lopsided. At one point, we noticed that we weren't getting many survey responses from people who identified as having one certain category of disabilities. So I reached out on social media, on forums, but also offline, calling ADA clinics, calling professors, specifically asking if folks who have that disability or a similar disability could fill out a survey to help a games accessibility project. I varied not just who I was asking, but where and how I was asking, reaching out to universities, care centers, and friends all over the world. Those efforts helped course correct and counteract our sampling bias. Not to mention, we were seeing pretty high conversion rate for survey participants recruiting other survey participants. This let us run the research basically on autopilot with some course correcting as we monitored the data for free. After 2,463 responses gathered over the course of just 3 weeks, we had the answers we were looking for. We developed not just a cursory understanding of the accessibility landscape as it pertained to what we were building, but we had amazing ideas and suggestions coming in through the survey. Of those 2,463 respondents, we also had our initial alpha testing group, reliable folks to ask follow-up questions to, insightful people to do paid testing with, worldwide representation of over 150 different disabilities, ultimately leading us to the impactful insights we needed to build Able to Play. Beyond the product insights and data, we also had our first community members from this group, power users who wanted the thing we were building to exist in the world. And let's be so real, going from 0 to 1 is always so challenging, and having a community to rely on honestly changes everything, from future ideation sessions to just helping get the word out. All right, so home stretch. Let's jam through some frequently asked questions relating to everything I've covered. inspired by conversations and consultations and headaches throughout my career. Can the snowball method or agile R&D practices work for solo developers, weekend warriors, people doing their own side projects? Absolutely yes. If you're going to go solo on a project, one of the biggest headaches is that there's no structure. It's just you. You're making the rules, you're setting the agenda, you're taking the steps. It can be exhausting and daunting. Relying on a framework like this can be really helpful, even if it's just guardrails or guidelines or just kind of a napkin sketch of the steps that you plan to take in a certain order. It can even be helpful just to reference as a reminder to not only ask questions but check your biases as you develop features, plan gameplay, design a UI, things like that. So absolutely, if you're recruiting play testers or survey respondents or what have you, the snowball method is really great. And agile R&D practices are awesome whether you're a team of 1 or 100. What if you're on a huge team and powerless to change a team's process? This is what I alluded to in the intro. Ask questions, use it for advocacy. Ask questions like, do we know why we're building this? Have users told us why they want this or that they want this? Ask questions like, how will we measure if what we're doing is successful? You don't have to be the person to unilaterally change a team's process. It would be wonderful if everyone had that power and could be heard to make positive changes happen, but team dynamics are just as messy as trying to get rocks to electrify a screen and make lights tell us a story. You can follow the general flow of this framework to prompt questions in a team environment, to guide discussion, even if you cannot unilaterally change the process. So asking questions along the lines of that agile R&D process, advocating for a pipeline, an actual flow of work, and not just everyone boiling the ocean. Ask questions. Do we know why we're building this? Have users told us they love this? If I was differently abled, would I be able to use this in the way that we all think this should be used? Just ask those questions. And with that, thank you so much. It's a wrap. Thank you so much for your time today. If you're working on a game that has cool accessibility features, or you're a publisher who wants to support your portfolio, please reach out. Let me know how either I or Able to Play can help. And my name is Armand Nobari. Thank you again so much for your time, and take care.